prices, price ceilings, and price floors. Okay, let's do a brief recap of what we've done so far this week. In previous lectures, we've developed models of supply and demand in each market that determines the equilibrium, quantities, and prices that will be sold. In this lecture, we're going to focus specifically on prices. In particular, we're going to look at what happens when we don't like the prices that the market gives us, and why it's a bad idea to mess around with market prices. Okay, let's start with a market that's in equilibrium. To make it simple, we're just going to use our market for pizzas again. Maybe these could be slices or something like that. In equilibrium, the price is $4. Maybe that's $4 for a slice of pizza, and the quantity sold is about 18, which could be 18,000 or 18 million, or however you want to think about it. So we have an equilibrium price of $4 and an equilibrium quantity of 18. Okay, suppose there's a decrease in the demand for pizza. Maybe there's an article on Facebook that says that pizza causes cancer, so people now want to eat less pizza. Here's a hint for the exam. Think about all the different things that we've gone over that might cause a decrease in demand. That's a good way to review for the exam. Anyway, let's go back to our market here for pizza, where we've had a decrease in demand. So notice we've gone from demand curve 1, which is now very faint, to demand curve 2, which is more obvious. So now we have an equilibrium quantity in the market of, say we're selling about 12, and it looks like the price would be about $3 a slice. Now, firms aren't going to react immediately to this change in demand. So at the old equilibrium price of $4, which most firms are probably still charging, at least for a while, supply, or the quantity supply, I should say, is now greater than demand. So what happens? The quantity is greater than demand at the price of $4. So suppliers look at this and they say, now I have slices of pizza that I can't sell. So I'm going to have to start discounting those slices in order to get them to move. So that maybe they give out coupons, or they put a sign in the window that says, buy one, get one 50% off. I mean, we've all seen this. Some way that sellers of a product try to get rid of their excess supply. So what they're effectively doing by discounting the price is they're cutting the price of pizza. As the price falls, the quantity demanded will increase. Remember, downward sloping demand curve. So effectively, the suppliers are cutting the price, and we're moving down our demand curve, just like the arrows show there, until we get to the new equilibrium price at about $3. Remember, once you get to equilibrium, there's no reason why the price or quantity will move, because that's the definition of equilibrium. So now we're in that stable situation with a new equilibrium price that I've called PE and an equilibrium quantity called QE. So notice what's happened here. So the change in prices, the fact that suppliers of pizza had to discount their slices, it does two things. The first thing is it gives an incentive to respond to what consumers want. Consumers want fewer pizzas, so sellers start cutting the price. Remember, way back in the first week, we talked about consumer sovereignty, how what consumers want determines what happens. This is consumer sovereignty in action. The change in prices also provides information to firms about what consumers want and where businesses should invest. All businesses now know that they should produce something other than pizza, or at least something in addition to pizza, because people don't want as much pizza as they used to. So they should invest in producing something else, like maybe adding salads to their menu. Notice that the price gives, or the change in prices, gives information to firms about what they should be selling, so they allocate their resources in the most efficient way. This is that invisible hand that we talked about in the first week. So prices provide us with a lot. Sticking to market prices provides a lot of advantages. Here's another example that you might want to look at about dynamics of moving away from and then back into market equilibrium. What would happen if the price of tomatoes goes up? Where tomatoes, remember, are an input for pizza. What would the market dynamics look like? Why don't you try practicing that on your own to see if you can work that out for yourself? Okay, so we've talked about how market prices are great. They give lots of information. Equilibrium prices are the price that we end up at and we don't move out of, so that's all great. But what happens if the equilibrium price is a price we don't like? Here's a very recent example of that happening. Between January and June of 2022, gas prices increased by nearly 50%. If you look at the table or the chart up at the top there, most places outside the West Coast, the gallon of gasoline in January of 2022 was about $3. By June, it was up to about $5. And on the West Coast, it was up to almost $6. Why did this happen? Well, there was increased demand after the pandemic. People wanted to start driving again and going places. And decreased supply due to the war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia are both sources of petroleum products, so the fact that a war started there cut back on supply. Once again, see if you can draw the graphs to show what happens when these two kind of things happen in the market. All right, so we end up at this higher equilibrium price, but people didn't like that price. A poll conducted by the Gallup organization in the summer of 2022 found that 2/3 of Americans said that these increases were causing them hardship. Now they were driving back to work again after the pandemic, but gasoline was really expensive, and that placed a lot of hardship on most people's budgets. So why didn't the government just pass a law that says that gas prices couldn't go above $3 a gallon? If they had, that would have been what's called a price ceiling. So basically, you say that the equilibrium, if you look at the diagram over there, we have a market price of $5 a gallon, and the price ceiling would be set at about $3 a gallon. This has happened in the past. For example, during World War II, because much of our industrial capacity was moved over to the war efforts, consumer products weren't being produced as much. The government didn't want prices going up, so they placed price controls on a lot of goods. So that happened during World War II. There was price ceilings set for a lot of consumer goods, aluminum foil, food, automobiles, all kinds of stuff. That was during wartime. Why don't we see this more often when prices go up like they did in the summer of 2022? Okay, here's why. At the price of $3, which remember is now no longer the equilibrium price, that's now our price ceiling, the quantity demanded with the new supply and demand curves is now greater than the quantity supplied. You can see that down at the bottom there, at $3, it hits the demand curve at a larger quantity than it hits the supply curve. This means that there is excess demand at the controlled price. People want to buy more at $3 a gallon than suppliers are willing to sell. That means that somebody is going to get the gas and somebody isn't, because there just isn't enough to go around. So once you set a price ceiling, there's a big problem. Someone has to decide who gets the gas. Now in World War II, when there were those price controls, they issued ration coupons. You couldn't buy aluminum foil or gasoline or anything unless you had a ration coupon as well as your money. Now there ended up being a black market in ration coupons, so people ended up having to buy ration coupons on the black market at higher prices, and so it really didn't work out very well. But you can see the basic problem here is that you have excess demand at the price, at the ceiling price. We can also have something called a price floor. Sometimes there might be pressure on the government to keep a price high. This is usually because there's some reason why people believe that you should support some particular industry. A good example of this is agriculture. There are lots of policies both in the United States and in Europe to support agricultural prices because we believe that small farmers should be helped, and for reasons like that. So there are price floors for dairy products like milk, sugar, and some other agricultural products, both in the United States and in Europe. So what happens when we set a price floor? That is, we say that the price cannot go below a particular level. Under this policy, we're setting a price like PF there. Notice that PF is greater than the equilibrium price. PF stands for price floor, by the way. So we've got this price that's greater than the equilibrium price. Let's say for milk. So this is a price floor for milk. That means that producers now want to sell more milk at that floor price that consumers are willing to buy. So now we've got excess supply, a whole bunch of milk out there that no one wants to buy. What do you do with the excess supply? Well, what typically happens is the government buys it up to make sure that the price floor is supported. And then it has all its milk on its hand. What are you going to do with it? Well, here's some of the things that have been done with the excess supply that the government bought from supporting price floors in agriculture. Here's a couple of programs that they've used. One was a law called PL 480, where basically the government bought food products, grains and stuff like that, and gave it away to poorer countries. Notice what happens when you do that. That increases the supply of food in those countries, which is great for consumers, but it's not so great for the local farmers. What it did was it drove down the prices there, and it put their farmers in trouble. Once again, this is a good example. Try to draw the supply and demand diagrams, both in the U.S. and in these foreign markets. So this didn't end up being a very good policy because maybe you were helping consumers in these other countries, but the farmers were being driven out of business, which was not a good thing. Another policy that was employed in the U.S. was, believe it or not, the school lunch program. Excess agricultural products were bought up and then distributed to schools to serve for lunches. So this meant that the lunch program was dependent on whatever was available from this excess supply, which may not be the most nutritionally sound lunches to serve school children. But this just gives you an idea of all the levels of complexity that come up when you try to support a price floor by having the government buy up the excess supply and then figuring out something to do with it. Another thing that was done was it just stored the stuff. At one point, the government had warehouses full of excess cheese because of its efforts to support the price floors. And eventually it ended up just having to throw the cheese out. Okay, so you can see why trying to change price ceilings, trying to impose a price ceiling and a price floor isn't a really great idea. You end up with either excess demand or excess supply, which creates all kinds of complications, and you break that link between the information in prices and the incentives that producers have to follow consumer sovereignty. Okay, so here's one final note I'm going to give you on price ceilings and price floors, just because students sometimes get a little confused here about which is which. A price floor is a price above the equilibrium price, and a price ceiling is the price below the equilibrium price. That kind of doesn't make sense. I mean, shouldn't be a ceiling be above the